At 5:16 PM on Saturday, November 23rd, 1963, the landscape of science fiction changed forever. The BBC had just aired the first episode of Doctor Who, a television show about a mysterious old man, his granddaughter and her 2 school teachers, who travel in a time machine inside of a police telephone box. Nobody could have ever predicted how successful this little show with a budget of a shoestring and half a packet of crisps would become. But over the last 60 years of Doctor Who, there have been a lot of episodes that never became a reality. In this new series, I hope to create a comprehensive history of Doctor Who's untold stories. Today it's time to look at the first Doctor episodes that never were. Nothing at the End of the Lane was the original title for Doctor Who's first episode, as suggested in early May 1963 by C.E. Webber in the programming's developing format guide. The episode would see teenager Biddy and her teachers Lola and Cliff meet a strange amnesiac old man and discover his invisible time machine. Nothing at the End of the Lane would soon be replaced by The Giants, which would have been a 4-part serial directed by Rex Tucker, where teenager Sue and her teachers Lola and Cliff meet a strange old man in the fog. Calling him Doctor Who, they discover that his home appears to be a police box, which is actually a time machine, bigger on the inside than it is on the outside. The 4 are accidentally transported to Cliff's science class lab and reduced to just an 1/8 of an inch in size. Cliff and Sue are separated from the time machine and are menaced by a caterpillar, a spider, a student's compass, and a microscope lens. They manage to communicate with the students and their teacher and are returned to the time machine. Sue, Cliff and Lola would eventually become Susan, Ian and Barbara, while the idea of the Doctor being explicitly referred to as Doctor Who would go unused. The Giants was eventually abandoned in favour of An Unearthly Child because Doctor Who creator Sidney Newman disliked the use of a caterpillar and spider as monsters and felt the story lacked incident and character. With the abandonment of C.E. Webber's The Giants, Robert Gould was asked to make a fresh attempt at the minuscule story. This would be a 4-part story with the TARDIS crew being shrunk to 1/16 of an inch in size. They are threatened by carpet dust storms, falling cigarette ash, and must figure out how to obtain food and water. By mid-September 1963, this was intended to be the 4th serial of Season 1. However, on February 4th, 1964, Gould and story editor David Whittaker agreed to abandon the minuscules idea. Whittaker offered to consider another storyline from the writer, with Gould suggesting a story about a planet where plants treat people the way people on Earth treat plants. Producer Verity Lambert raised concerns that this might be too similar to the novel Day of the Triffids. On the 9th, Gould informed Whittaker that he had decided against taking the idea any further. The miniaturization idea would eventually make it to screen in the form of Season 2's Planet of Giants by Louis Marks. When Anthony Coburn's An Unearthly Child replaced The Giants in June 1963, Coburn was commissioned to supply a replacement second story as well, to be directed by Rex Tucker. However, when Coburn left the BBC to become a freelance writer, the serial had to be recommissioned, gaining the title The Robots. The Robots was originally set on 30th century Earth, but by the end of July its location had been shifted to an alien planet. The production team grew increasingly unhappy with The Robots, and on September 23rd they decided to switch it with the intended 5th story, The Daleks. The following month the scripts gained a new title, The Masters of Luxor. This story would see the TARDIS drawn by a signal to one of the moons of Luxor. There they discover a world dominated by robots led by the Perfect One. The Perfect One has been experimenting on people to discover the secret of life, kidnapping Barbara and Susan, planning to use them as test subjects before draining their life force. The Doctor and Ian reawaken Tabon, the scientist who invented the Perfect One. Tabon confronts the Perfect One, sending the robots out of control. The robots kill Tabon and destroy the Perfect One, while the time travellers escape in the TARDIS. The episode titles for the serial were The Cannibal Flower, The Mockery of a Man, A Light on the Dead Planet, Tabon of Luxor, An Infinity of Surprises, and The Flower Blooms. Around the start of 1964, The Masters of Luxor was considered for the 6th story of Season 2, but by the end of the year, The Masters of Luxor was dropped altogether. In August 1992, Titans Books published The Masters of Luxor as a script book, edited by John McElroy, and in August 2012, Big Finish Productions released an audio adaptation by Nigel Robinson. Alan Wakeman was one of the early writers approached in summer 1963 to contribute to Doctor Who, which was still in development. Wakeman's storyline, called The Living Planet, was commissioned on July 31st. At this point, the Doctor's granddaughter was still known as Suzanne. Wakeman also used ideas for the programme's backstory developed by an Unearthly Child writer Anthony Coburn, but ultimately discarded, such as Suzanne being an alien princess named Findoclar, and she and the Doctor are being pursued by the mysterious Paladins. The story would have the TARDIS landing on a planet with a surface covered by a pattern of small, edible hexagonal structures. The travellers are attacked by flying metallic fish, and the Doctor fears that the Paladins have finally caught up to him and Suzanne, but they are saved when long stems extend out from the hexagons, spearing the animals. They realise that the fish are part of the planet's bizarre ecosystem. Drawn by a strange, maddening sound, they discover a series of holes, in which Suzanne becomes trapped. Ian rescues her, and they realise that the entire planet is a gigantic living organism. The planet tries to absorb the TARDIS, but its alien construction is incompatible, and the planet is forced to release it, allowing the travellers to escape. Wakeman's planned episode titles were Airfish, What Eats What, The Living Planet, and Just in Time. The Living Planet was deemed to be too sophisticated for the intended child audience, and so it was abandoned. In 2005, following Doctor Who's successful return to television, Wakeman offered The Living Planet to showrunner Russell T Davies, but this was rejected. The script was eventually published in the magazine Nothing at the End of the Lane in 2012. On September 2nd, 1963, Malcolm Hulke submitted the story Britain 408 AD. The story involved the departure of the Romans from Britain around the start of the 5th century, in the midst of clashes against the Celts and Saxons, culminating with the time travellers fleeing the indigenous savages back to the safety of the TARDIS. Story editor David Whittaker asked Hulke to revise his original storyline because he felt that the plot was too complicated, and also that the serial's conclusion was too similar to An Unearthly Child. It was hoped that an amended version of Britain 408 AD might become the 6th serial of Season 1, to be directed by Christopher Barry, but on September 23rd it was decided that the production block did not need another historical story, and Hulke's serial was abandoned. Following Whittaker's departure, Hulke resubmitted Britain 408 AD, but this was rejected on April 2nd, 1965 by Whittaker's successor, Dennis Spooner, because the Romans had already featured in his own story, The Romans.
Let us go, will you? Otherwise you'll be getting some of that alligator treatment. Go on your way. About your business. Go along.
On September 23rd, 1963, Hulke was asked to stop working on Britain 408 AD and begin developing The Hidden Planet instead, which was a story idea he had submitted alongside Britain 408 AD on September 2nd. This would put the time travellers on the 10th planet, a world identical to Earth, but whose orbit around the Sun is diametrically opposed to our planet's, making it undetected. This world is very much like Earth, but there are subtle differences such as 4-leaf clovers being common. Most notably, women are the dominant sex, while men struggle for equality. The leader of the planet is Barbara's double, and Barbara is kidnapped by rebels. Meanwhile, the Doctor, Susan and Ian are embroiled in the struggle for male suffrage. After being moved around the order of the season, The Hidden Planet eventually found itself in the 5th spot. When Hulke delivered his script for episode 1 in January 1964, the production team found it unacceptable and asked Hulke to undertake rewrites, meaning the Keys of Marinus was hastily commissioned to take its place. By July, Hulke had reluctantly rewritten the adventure as a 5-parter. and consideration was given to developing it for season 2. However, it was felt that too much work would be needed to restructure the Hidden Planet after the departure of Susan, and there was also concern about the adventure's lack of monsters, now viewed as a key component of the programme's science fiction serials. The Hidden Planet was therefore abandoned by story editor David Whittaker on September 24th. Hulk resubmitted his storyline to the production office following Whittaker's departure from Doctor Who, but it was again rejected on April 2nd, 1965, by new story editor Dennis Spooner, because it still included Ian and Barbara, who were about to exit the series. However, the concept of a 10th planet would be revisited during season 4 in an unrelated serial by Kit Pedler and Jerry Davies, named The 10th Planet. On September 24, 1963, Terry Nation was commissioned to write scripts for a 7-part story named The Red Fort. This would see the time travellers embroiled in the Indian Mutiny of 1857, when Indian troops rose up against the colonial officers of the British East India Company. The assault on the Red Fort, a palace in Delhi, would probably have featured prominently. However, it seems that Nation did little work on the Red Fort, and may have even forgotten about it entirely. The Red Fort was intended to be the 8th story of season 1, but it was dropped altogether on January 21st, 1964. Nation would eventually write The Keys of Marinus instead. On January 6th, 1964, Maurice Fahey contacted story editor David Whittaker about writing for Doctor Who. Whittaker commissioned a script for 1 episode, which became The Fragile Yellow Ark of Fragrance. This episode was to be set on an alien planet with a man named Rhythm attempting to woo Barbara. However, her rejection of his advances means that Rhythm is now sentenced to death. Whittaker rejected this story on the 24th, feeling its subject matter was unsuitable for Doctor Who, but he encouraged Fahey to continue developing ideas for the programme. In November 2010, Big Finish Productions released an audio adaptation of The Fragile Yellow Ark of Fragrance. Aware that Fahey was interested in Greco-Roman mythology, Whittaker suggested an adventure about the Greek pirate Barbarossa, in which the Doctor would be forced to invite somebody into the TARDIS. Fahey instead began work on Farewell Great Macedon, also known as Alexander the Great. Fahey was so enthusiastic for the project that he ignored Whittaker's advice to write only 1 script, instead producing a full 6-part serial. The episodes were titled The Hanging Gardens of Babylon, The Wrath of the Greatest Grecian of Them All, or O Son, My Son, A Man Must Die, The World Lies Dead at Your Feet, In the Arena, Farewell Great Macedon. The serial would have the TARDIS materialise amidst the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, where the Doctor and his companions meet Alexander the Great. Members of Alexander's retinue, however, are plotting to murder the king so that Seleucus can ascend to the throne and allow them to return to their homeland. The conspirators try to frame the time travellers, but the Doctor and Ian succeed in a series of trials, and Alexander's bodyguard, Ptolemy, proves their innocence. However, history cannot be changed, and despite the Doctor's efforts to save the king's life, Alexander dies while Ptolemy helps the companions escape to the TARDIS. Interestingly, the first episode would have explained the time travellers' ability to understand other languages by showing them hooked up to a computer which teaches them ancient Greek. Initially, Whittaker felt that Fahey's script simply needed tightening up, but in response to criticism from schools after the transmission of Marco Polo, the production office decided to set historical stories on the edge of famous historical events, rather than in the midst of them. Fahey was unwilling to rewrite his storyline to reflect this edict, and so Farewell Great Macedon was abandoned on July 31st. In November 2010, Big Finish Productions released an audio adaptation of Farewell Great Macedon. By late February 1964, story editor David Whittaker had decided to write one of the later season 1 serials himself, a story set in 16th century Spain after the Armada, with Gerald Blake to direct. However, he soon replaced this with The Reign of Terror. By mid-April, Whittaker was considering using his Armada tale as an early Season 2 serial, to be broadcast after the Dalek invasion of Earth. although this never came to pass. After Whittaker left the programme, he submitted a new storyline titled The New Armada, most likely a revised version of his original idea. This was rejected on January 17, 1966 by story editor Jerry Davis, who felt that it was too complex with too many characters and subplots. However, Davis invited Whittaker to submit further ideas, which eventually led to Whittaker writing The Power of the Daleks for Season 4. Season 1 of Doctor Who was a huge success despite its numerous production problems and tiny budget. Averaging 8 million viewers and catapulting the Daleks into a nationwide phenomenon, Doctor Who had truly defied any and all expectations. The final episode of The Reign of Terror saw the end of Doctor Who's first season, but on Halloween 1964 the show would return for Season 2, bringing with it the return of the Daleks and the shocking departure of Susan. But the rest of the First Doctor era would also see many more unmade episodes. From Leif Erikson to a sunless planet, join me next time for the rest of the First Doctor's untold stories.